Hello and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly hangout where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. The thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, send questions and comments to our Twitter page at Mason Roundtable or on the Facebook event page. As for me, I'm your host and moderator, John Ruark, past master of the Patriot Lodge number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. And I'll hand it off to the icon of Robert Johnson.
Thanks, John. I hope you guys can hear me okay. Sorry about the audio. I am currently in Kentucky, and the Wi-Fi at the hotel is not the greatest. Robert Johnson, Worshipful Master of Waukegan Lodge number 78 in Waukegan, Illinois, and host of the Whence Came You Masonic podcast.
It's okay, RJ. It's an improvement.
You got a face for radio, and I love it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. I really love you, too.
Alrighty. Moving down south, Juan Sepulveda.
Hello, everybody. Juan Sepulveda, a member of Orange Blossom Lodge number 80 in Kissimmee, Florida, and the host of the Winding Stairs Freemasonry podcast.
And last but not least for now, hopefully we'll have other guests later on, Jason Richards.
Hey, everybody. Jason Richards, the junior warden still of Acacia Lodge number 16 in good old Clifton, Virginia.
Very good. You haven't been fired yet. Excellent.
No. Well, I haven't lit the lodge on fire since they fired me from the senior deacon post last year. So.
Wow. Well, funny you say that. Or not so funny.
No,
because
bad segue.
Very first segue into Masonic news. It happened again.
Womp, womp.
I don't know how many times it has been since we've gone on the air, but last Wednesday, June 3rd, there was another, not only fire or arson attempt, it actually burned down the building in Trenton, Florida. A Masonic lodge was destroyed by an arsonist. How far away is Trenton? Juan?
I'm not sure how far it is. I do have brothers that frequent the lodge and have good friends down there. So, you know, this one hit close to home, and it's really unfortunate too. The man who actually, well, he allegedly committed the arson attempt. He was he wanted to join the fraternity, and it didn't go through because he had some sort of felony happen in the meantime. So this seems to be somewhat retaliatory. It's like a sore loser kind of.
Wow.
Yep.
So, well, I guess you could say the process works, right? For those who don't know, we do vet people before they join the lodge, and no one can just walk in and become a Mason. We do, in some states, even do background checks. Virginia just added that. And we want to make sure we're bringing good men. And for someone to prove himself unworthy of joining the craft by doing something as horrible as this, we can, at the most positive, say that the process works. We are guarding the West Gate.
Yeah. I just wonder, like, if this is the caliber of man that he is, was it out of his own accord that he approached a lodge, or was he brought in by someone? You see, it makes me think, how could you react to something like that? If somebody asks you, how do I become a member, and you clearly know that he's not a good man, how do you not get him close enough to submit a petition and actually visit the lodge and all that? You know, I really have no answers for that, but it just makes me think about that, and it makes me sick.
Well, and you know, sometimes, you know, people conceal things from other people all the time, and you know, how often have you met, you know, someone who is just very gregarious and you know, really fantastic person, and you're like, yeah, this guy would make a great Mason, and then, you know, come to find out it's like, oh, he just got arrested. Well, crap.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if you guys have ever had the issue where, you know, we have people who come in, and they come in week after week after week, and you know, there are professional bad guys that do this, and they're called sociopaths. And there have been a few. So it's you cannot. I refuse to go on just dinners and like constant meetings alone. I really feel that what you guys are doing in Virginia is a positive step with the background check.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about, like, at Waukegan Lodge, we're raising the petition fee to $200. Well, if we're not doing a background check and a couple other things, what is that really for?
Mhm.
Like, to me, I think the background check should be an absolute. But, you know.
Yeah, that's good. That might be its own show. I mean, it's definitely
Yeah.
something that's new here, and it was not an easy process. Probably something we could talk about at a later time. But
That's a good idea.
again, it would have caught his background before he had got further along in the process.
Right.
All right, Nick, why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh, hello. Nick Johnson, Corinthian Lodge number 67, Big Ten, Farmington.
All right.
See? Nice and easy.
Welcome. All right. Any other discussion on the arson attempt? Well, successful arson attempt.
Yeah, sadly.
Yeah. So our sympathies go out to the brethren there of that lodge.
Absolutely.
All right. Next topic for this evening is for those who are fans of the band 1,000 Horses. They have a new video out called "This Ain't No Drunk Dial." What does it have to do with masonry? Well, I'll tell you what it has to do with masonry. It was filmed inside of the Masonic Temple on Broadway. So we have embedded the link to the video in the show notes, which you can only find on themasonicroundtable.com. And this is actually the best screenshot I can find right here of him walking into the lodge or the building, and in the background you can see a little bit of one of the portraits of, I guess, one of the masters or grandmasters. It's blurry. They did a good job covering up a lot of the Masonic stuff, but you can tell it's a very old, ornate building anyway that they perform in the video. So if you want to check that out, it's a catchy song, but even cooler that it was filmed entirely inside of a Masonic lodge.
But did he sit on the golden throne over at the United Grand Lodge like Lady Gaga did? Just saying.
He did not. They were like all on trial or something. It was like supposed to be a courthouse. I don't know. I didn't pay much attention because it's country music. And
Right. So if you play it backwards,
Well, there goes our audience.
if you play it backwards, it goes into some Masonic secrets.
Well, you know what happens when you play country music backwards?
you get your truck back, your dog back.
your wife back.
You get happy too.
Wow.
That was good. I never heard that. Thank you.
Alrighty. So go check it out. And this is not the first time a music video has been filmed inside of a Masonic lodge or a building. I mean, the Detroit Masonic Temple is definitely a home for concerts as well. But I mean, the first one that comes to mind is our friend and brother Apathy, right? He definitely filmed a couple of his videos in the lodge, so kind of cool. Alrighty, that is about all I had. Anything else for Masonic news this week? All right, let's move right into our Masonic Monday question.
Hey, we've
Hold
got
on.
somebody
Tuesday.
online.
I made it finally.
Yay, Don McCoy.
Yay!
It's the
We're
old
so
guy
happy
that
you're
can't
here.
work the technology. Oh man. And
Yeah.
the computer. So.
No problem. Thanks for joining us. For those who are watching the video portion, we're trying to do a seamless transition, and Jason just ruined that. But Don McAndrews, thank you very much for joining us again. First ever repeat guest.
Repeat offender.
Oh.
And we're very fortunate to have you tonight. We're just finishing up on some Masonic news. We'll go into a little bit of trivia, and then we'll let you run. So we'll hold your introductions until after Nick Johnson goes over our Masonic Monday question
On Tuesday.
Thank you very much, John. So, we had a pretty good question, and I thought I'd worded it in a way that a quick Google search would find it, but interestingly enough, we only had 4 correct answers, of which 3 are our usual TMR viewers. So those 3 are Greg Guffey of Acacia Lodge number 51 of the Grand Lodge of Minnesota, Justin Miller of Sacramento Lodge number 24 of the Grand Lodge of New Mexico, and Jonathan Primo of Lincoln Park Ionic Lodge number 539 of the Grand Lodge of Michigan. And the answer to last week's question was Reverend Brother Frederick Dalcho, MD. He was the 2nd Sovereign Grand Commander of the Mother Council of the World. That's the Southern Jurisdiction. They have this huge title, and I'm not going to say it all because that would pretty much be the whole podcast. In Charleston, South Carolina. He also served as the Grand Chaplain of the Grand Lodge of South Carolina for many, many years, finally vacating his position after one too many healings. He healed way too many separations, and it finally broke him, and that was that. So, bravo to you 3 for doing a fantastic job. And now let's get into the question, because, I was watching the UEFA Champions League final with Barca taking it 3-1, which was crazy, but kind of slow, but not really surprising since Messi was there. But anyway, getting back to it. This week's question for Masonic Monday question on Tuesday for the week of June 8th, 2015 is: this famous Freemason was an incredibly talented footballer who holds an incredible record, scoring 60 goals in a single season. Who was this famous English footballer? For what team did he play when he achieved that record? And which lodge was he a member? When you have an answer, you can send it to masonicmonday@gmail.com. Don't forget your lodge name and your lodge number, and also the hashtag goal. There we go. That's what we want. And,
how many O's is that?
Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 12.
12 O's.
So there you go. Goal.
My question is, if this guy's a football player, was he like on the Steelers, or did he play for the Ravens, or?
Hey, it's very possible. He was incredible.
Yeah.
Can you say soccer?
I could say soccer.
You Yankee.
And by the way, yes, my team is FC United, so yeah, I'm going to wait for all the hate mail to come towards me. But it doesn't really matter since they're like level 6 in the whole pyramid, so minor leagues.
Wow.
Awesome. Back to you, John.
Great. So, without further ado, let's move right into our main topic for tonight, and I will let our special guest, Don McAndrews, introduce himself again with his title that he holds in the Operatives. So, Don, give us a little bit of introduction and then take it away.
Well, I was the founding Deputy Master Mason for the Operatives in Virginia, the Bull Run Quarry Assembly. And I just have recently received word from England that I am to be, this fall, the Deputy Master Mason of the 5th degree for the province of the United States of America. So
Wow.
that's sort of cool, yeah.
That is awesome.
Congratulations.
The Operatives are it's an organization that actually began in the early 1800s. It wasn't organized formally as it is in modern time until the early 1900s. So we're just celebrating our first 100-year anniversary, actually. But in the 1800s, the the guilds and the companies were going out of business, basically. When the Parliament authorized the trade unions to be the official trainers of the trades, basically the old craft of chisel and mallet was dying. They had modern pneumatic tools and had no need for the old craft anymore. So it was dying out, and there were two brothers who worked very hard to try to maintain the old rituals so that they wouldn't be lost. And that's basically what the modern version of the Operatives is now. The Operatives have a system of 7 degrees. So prior to 1717, which is when modern speculative masonry began, the general usage in masonry was 7 degrees. That was changed to 2 degrees, and later on a 3rd degree was added. There never was in the Operatives an equivalent to the Master Mason degree. Every year at the Grand Assemblage in London, which is in the fall, in September, they performed the ancient drama. And the ancient drama is the legend of Hiram Abiff. And even the indentured apprentices, as the 1st degree is called, they were allowed to witness the ancient drama. And there are 3 Grand Masters who preside over the Operatives. The 1st Grand Master is considered the most high-ranking of the 3. The 2nd Grand Master, the 1st Grand Master is elected usually for a period of 5 years. The 2nd Grand Master usually serves a period of 3 years, and the 3rd Grand Master, every year he portrays himself in the ancient drama. He is slain, and then a new 3rd Grand Master has to be elected. So that's sort of the essence of the ancient drama. And the ancient drama was the basis for the Master Mason degree in modern speculative masonry. The Operatives, just to give you a little background, the actual name of the organization is the Worshipful Society of Freemasons, Rough Masons, Wallers, Slaters, Paviors, Plasters, and Bricklayers. Better known as, yeah, exactly. That's why we call it the Operatives. And yeah, you can actually go to operatives.org. It's .uk.org. It's a English website. We do have if you go to yorkwright.org, you'll see a link for the Operatives in the USA, and we have a website up there as well. But the rituals that we practice now were actually researched by an incredible scholar, English scholar by the name of John Yarker. John Yarker, I don't think he would have done this on his own, actually. There's a guy by the name of Clement Stretton who's sort of the founder of the Operatives. He basically revitalized several of the old lodges that were dying, and he got John Yarker to actually research. He was an incredible scholar. He got him to research the rituals, and together they put together the rituals that we practice now, the 7 degrees. John Yarker, I didn't realize his connection with Clement Stretton. I knew Stretton was one of the founders of the Operatives. But Yarker, I've got a book of his called The Arcane Schools, and I highly recommend it. It's a great book. Yeah, I think you can probably buy it on Amazon.com. But it's a really interesting book on the different arcane schools throughout history that basically were the predecessors to Masonry. And there's a lot of mystery schools, initiatory schools, and he sort of puts all that together, and it's really a fascinating work. He was a scholar. Clement Stretton was the organizer. Stretton actually, like I say, revitalized these lodges, but Stretton was the guy that got Yarker to do the research to put all this together, and together the two of them actually are responsible for the modern organization that we know as the Operatives. Let me tell you a little bit about the degrees. The first degree is called the indentured apprentice. Now, indenture is an interesting word. It's an English thing that basically means contract. So an indenture is a contract, and the 14-year-old boy who would come and present himself to the lodge would be indentured. He would sign a contract, basically serving 7 years of his life to learn the trade. And once he signed his indenture, he would be given the first degree, which is the indentured apprentice, and he would then be trained. It would not train outsiders. The indentured apprentice, once he finished his 7 years, his indenture would be signed on the reverse side, on the back of it, releasing him as a fellow of the craft. And the interesting thing is, you know, we talk about calling each other brother in the lodge. Well, back in the olden days, once you were an indentured apprentice, you were referred to as brother. But once you became a fellow of the craft, once you were released from your indenture, you were no longer a brother, you were a fellow. So there was a distinction there with the indentured apprentice and the fellow. The third degree was super fellow, fitter and marker. And the fourth degree is also a super fellow, setter, erector. Now, you remember in the Entered Apprentice lecture, we talk about the stones for the temple. Because the temple was sacred ground, there was not the sound of axe, hammer, or any tool of iron heard in the house while it was building. That the stones were all raised, squared, and numbered at the quarry once raised. And that's basically the third degree, is the story about the fitting and marking of the stones at the temple site. Actually, a template for the foundation of the temple was constructed there so that each course of stones could be fitted and then sent to the sacred site once each course was complete. The superfellow setter erector is the story of how they read these particular markings and signs engraved in the stones so that they can put the stones together in the same order, perfectly fit. That's something we have sort of lost in our modern Freemasonry. However, the signs and grips and words, much of that stuff is familiar to Royal Archmasons. So consequently, to become a member of the Operatives, you have to be a Royal Archmason. The fifth and sixth degrees are the supervisory degrees. Those are only, when we have an assemblage, it's an assemblage of lodges of the fourth through the first degree, and we can only confer the first 4 degrees locally. The fifth and sixth degree, being supervisory, are only conferred by the region, which is the USA in this case, and that's usually done at AMD Masonic Week. Those are intendant and superintendent, which is the fifth degree, and then the sixth degree is the past master. But let me caution you on that. It's not what we know as past master. It's PASSED, past as in pass the test. Our lecture tells us that in the olden days that there would be an assemblage of past masters who would take the candidate to become a past master and basically grill him with 70 or 80 questions on technical things, such as the grain of a stone, the weight-bearing loads of different stones, and you had to answer all of those questions perfectly or you would not be passed. So the idea is you passed the test, you were a past master. And then the seventh degree, there are only 3 members of the seventh degree, and that is the 3 Grand Master Masons. There are others admitted to the 7th degree in an honorary capacity, but the only active members of the 7th degree are the 3 Grand Master Masons. Another interesting aspect of the operatives is that there are no past titles. You're either the Deputy Master Mason of an assemblage or you're not. So once you've finished your term and you've been replaced, you're not past anything. So
it has been.
Yeah, well, it's like you don't exist anymore. So you go back to the state in which you were. But unlike we like to perpetuate the titles, and I'm past this, I'm past that, I'm past that. It doesn't work in the operative. So that's an interesting distinction.
Here's a question, real quick, Don, for the supervisory degrees, the 5th and 6th. Are those like can non-5th and 6th degree operative masons view those?
No.
Or okay, so they're
Nope.
just at that high level. Okay.
Right. Only members of those degrees are allowed to do that.
Super secret squirrel.
I've been conferring the 5th degree for a couple of years, and so it was interesting when I got a call from our Deputy Grand Master Mason for the province of the USA asking if I would be willing to be Deputy Master Mason of the 5th degree. It was like, yeah, I mean, that's an incredible honor, and I'm really pleased to have it. But his comment was, "You've been doing the work. You might as well have the titles." So I really appreciate that, though. It was really a great honor. One of the fundamental differences in the operatives, and it makes sense when you think about it, and it helps us understand our speculative masonry better. The first time I entered into a stone yard, which is where we do our degree work, we have a 1st degree stone yard, 2nd degree stone yard, 3rd degree stone yard, and 4th degree stone yard. The first time I entered in the stone yard, we were informed that we were entering from the south, and yet I looked across the room and there was the junior warden sitting in the north.
That's different.
But stop to think about it. If the junior warden has to observe the sun in the south to call the craft from labor to refreshment, he can't sit in the south with his back to the sun. He has to sit in the north. So it sort of makes sense from an operative standpoint.
Interesting.
Whereas if you stop to think about our ritual in speculative masonry, the junior warden, as the sun in the south of meridian, is the glory and beauty of the day. So stands the junior warden in the south. So he basically is the sun in the south. He represents the sun in the south. And that's the fundamental difference between operative masonry and speculative masonry. So the master obviously would have to sit in the west to observe the rising sun in order to set the craft to work. And the senior warden would have to sit in the east to observe the setting sun to pay the craft their wages. So it all makes sense, but in speculative masonry, we actually represent the sun in those different positions. So that's a fundamental difference, I think. And there are other differences that you see within the degrees. We have some officers that we don't have in speculative masonry. Superintendent of work, he's actually a pretty busy guy. He's got a huge table full of tools and implements that are used within the conferral of the degrees, and we don't have that in speculative masonry. The tools used in the operatives are actual tools. I would say the level probably stands about 30 inches high. The plumb probably about 36 or 40 inches high. We have a straight edge, which we don't use in masonry, and we have gauges, not gauges such as the 24-inch gauge. These are gauges that are basically rectangular or other shapes that are meant to fit over a stone to see if it is actually up to size or not. And so there's a number of tools that are a bit different in the speculatives.
Mm-hmm. So how would you compare the degree system to the similar appendant body or system that in the U.S.?
Well, I think once you've experienced the operative degrees, you realize that the first two degrees are pretty much the same. And in fact, it's interesting. We had some Scottish Masons come to Northern Virginia, and they actually exemplified the EA degree. And you know how we have the EA clad in only one shoe, and we talk about the passage in the book of Ruth about to confirm things, one plucks off its shoe. But actually in the operatives and in Scottish Masonry, they actually have the candidate clad in two shoes and ask him to give him one of the shoes before they explain that passage of scripture out of Ruth. So yeah, and it's interesting to see that the Scottish Masonry is much more in line with the operative degrees. So I just thought that was very fascinating. Masonry is in two denominations. We say operative and speculative. However, in ancient times, Masonry was considered under two denominations, and that was square Masons and arch Masons. An interesting distinction, because square Masons were the ones who built the walls,
Yep.
and arch Masons were the ones who built the penetrations in the walls, the doors, the windows, that sort of thing. And the geometry obviously is very much different between square Masons and square Masons and arch Masons. And the training would have to be obviously different. King Richard III issued coats of arms. He's the guy that started the whole heraldic thing. He issued coats of arms for the Masons. For the square Masons, he issued a coat of arms with the field of blue. And for the arch Masons, he issued a coat of arms with a field of red. Interesting. Yep. So our blue and red distinctions of Masonry are very ancient in origin.
Wow.
And actually some of our lectures and operatives would indicate that Masons would mark their stones in indelible red or indelible blue, depending on which order they were. So,
all right, let's see if we can open up for some questions from the hosts here. The first one off of my head was, how does one join, and how many are in, say, the United States? How many assemblies are there?
It's sort of an invitatory body. So basically, I think the operatives are very, very strict about, we only meet about 4 times a year, and they're very strict about making all of the meetings. We understand sometimes there are going to be conflicts, but the meetings are scheduled well in advance, and we really expect everybody to attend each of the meetings. Advancement in the operatives is very much based on your attendance. If you don't have at least 75% attendance, you don't advance. And it can take, for the first 4 degrees, it could take 2-3 years to advance through those 4 degrees. So basically, for the first degree, you could take the second degree at the next meeting, but between the second and third, you'd have to have at least an intervening meeting that you attended. And for the 4th degree, you'd have to have at least 2 intervening meetings and at least a 75% attendance basis. So it's pretty strict on that basis, and we're not huge in numbers, so it's important to do it.
All right, Juan, do you have any questions?
Yeah, Brother Donald, you mentioned in between meetings. Does that mean that there are meetings in other jurisdictions, or is it an informal meeting? How do the brothers actually meet?
There are meetings in other jurisdictions which any of the operatives are welcome to attend. However, it doesn't count towards your advancement in your home quarry. So, and they call it an assemblage. In olden times, there would be a deputy master mason for the first degree, a deputy master mason for the second degree, a deputy master mason for the third degree, deputy master mason for the fourth degree. In modern times, that's not quite so practical, so we have a deputy master mason over an assemblage of lodges of the fourth to the first degree. We open the lodges fourth to the first degree and conduct all business in that, and all signs given are that of the first degree. And basically, if we're going to do any degree work, say we confer the third degree, we would ask all those below the third degree to retire. And once that is accomplished, then we would close the lodges fourth to the first degree and open the lodge on that particular degree and continue.
All right. How about you, Nick?
There's a eunuch here? Oh no.
A eunuch?
You're
not allowed.
Honestly, I have paid that
Get
joke
out.
on so many vendors. It's just hilarious. But no, it's kind of interesting. Is I'm a member of a number of different invitational bodies, and obviously I have a petition addiction, so that's why I'm getting kind of jittery looking for a pen. But it's kind of interesting. Now, how closely, because you were discussing Scotland, and I know at least in our historical records, it seems that Scotland was probably the location where Operative transformed to speculative.
Well,
and
that's very possible. Although I think probably our modern speculative masonry is more based on Scottish rituals than any other. They really come through. James Anderson, one of the founders of the the first Grand Lodge in 1717, James Anderson, keep in mind, came down from Scotland. So I think there may have been an influence there with him. Prior to the formation of the Grand Lodge in 1717, we had a decline in the operative masons, and it's sort of a foggy history there. And Anderson doesn't do anything. He's the big historian of the Grand Lodge, but he doesn't do much to help us understand that transition. However, let me give you some interesting convergences of events. Back in 1536, Henry VIII began appropriating and selling the lands of the monasteries. This was to fund his wars. St. James's Palace, which is very close to where the operatives meet at the Grand Lodge of Markmaster Masons on St. James's Street. St. James's Palace is built of brick in 1536, same year. It's an indication that stone was no longer the principal building material. So there's a really interesting convergence of things there with Henry VIII and St. James's Palace being built out of brick. The English Civil War in 1651. Well, the result of the English Civil War was that there weren't any more churches being built. Parliament controlled the purse at that point, not the king, and they were not building any churches. The Great Fire in London, 1666. They completed rebuilding. One of our Grand Masters of the Operatives, Sir Christopher Wren, was in charge of most of the rebuilding of London. Once the rebuilding was done, they didn't really need any more stonecutters. So that convergence of events basically put the old stone guilds and mason companies in the trash. And probably around 1650 is when you see the operative lodges beginning to accept non-operative members in quantity. Scientists, engineers, architects, gentlemen of learning. Densely populated areas like London and Edinburgh saw lodges with a growing number of speculative members, and All of these sort of converged on that focus of 1717 when you had a lot of lodges in London with a lot of speculative members, basically talking about how they could make this ritual, the ancient sort of arcane ritual, to be more philosophical in nature. And I think that's pretty much what led to that change, plus the fact that the old operative lodges were just dying.
And so, you know, it's a question I've had is, where exactly did this operative ritual come from? Was it something that had already existed? Was it reformatted in some way?
I'm reading an interesting book right now called Masonry and the Ancient Gods. And it's a really interesting examination of the fact that the initiatory rites that we have in Masonry are nothing new. They're very, very ancient. They go back to ancient India, as a matter of fact. In this book, the author, this is a reproduction book of a very old 18 or 17, well, no, it'd be 19th century book, 1800s. This guy claims that there were English Masons who went over to India and were admitted to some of their secret societies, the Brahmins, some of their temples. They actually got admission into their temples because of the signs and words and grips that they could produce. In the dervishes in the Middle East, they had many of the same signs, many of the same words, passwords, many of the same grips. So what we know in modern speculative masonry really goes way beyond just the development of the craft of building. It goes into ancient initiatory rites of many, many different kinds.
So it does have some esoterics blended in there
under
the guise of operative masonry.
Right, and basically they took these ancient initiatory rites and adapted them to the building trade. So I think ours comes from ancient sources, but there are much more ancient sources even beyond that.
That sounds very meta for Masons, you know.
So Don,
sorry,
Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about, you know, one of the books you're reading that sheds a little bit of light into the initiatic experience. You know, how much do you get into things like sacred geometry in the operatives? Do you deal with that at all?
There's a bit of that, yeah, absolutely. In fact, when a new assemblage is established, the ceremony is basically a reenactment of the laying out of the foundation of King Solomon's Temple. And it is a fascinating ceremony. I mean, that's worth the entire cost of joining the operatives right there. I just absolutely love it. But I'm excited by geometry. I'm excited by ancient geometry. I'm excited by sacred geometry. And there's a lot of that present. Of course, one of the most important aspects of that is the Pythagorean theorem. And that plays a very big part. It's throughout the operative system. It certainly is a very major part of the ceremony of the foundation of King Solomon's Temple. Now, there were ancient uses of that 3-4-5 triangle. If you determine a center point and have parallel lines on either side of that point, now doesn't that sound a little familiar to you? And like the EA lecture, the point within a circle and two parallel lines.
I love it.
You can actually take from that center point and using the square angle of the 3-4-5 triangle, you can put rays out to the parallel lines and it will intersect perfectly to create a perfect square, a 1 by 1 square. If you use the larger of the acute angles, it will put out rays that will strike it to make a perfect 1/2. And if you use the smaller acute angle, it will put out rays that will make a perfect 1/3, which is very interesting. So you don't have to do a lot of measuring in the ancient operative system, in the ancient sacred geometry tradition. If you know the relationships of these angles, it's very easy with a point and two parallel lines to totally lay the thing out with string.
Wow.
Very quickly, very easily, not a lot of measuring, and it's very accurate.
Let's see if I want to cut you off to see if Robert Johnson, who's been hiding in the shadows, if he had anything he wanted to ask. Robert, are you still there? All right, we had some technical issues. All right.
So while we're waiting for RJ, I was just wondering, hey Don, for those brethren who aren't near any assemblages who are really interested in things like ancient geometry and sacred geometry, do you have a couple of books you'd recommend? I know you do.
I do, but I don't have them at the top of my head right now. I bought 2 volumes. It cost me $300, and I found them in a bookstore in Australia. Wow. It was a book last published in the 1960s on sacred geometry. It was originally published in one of the Scandinavian countries, and I can't remember for sure which, so I won't say. But it has been out of print since the 1960s. It was obviously not a real popular book, but it was the most fascinating read I think I've ever had in my life. It was worth every penny of the $300. And basically, the guy explained, he back-engineered to discover the whole system of measurement used in ancient Egypt. And he also, by a very careful analysis of the writings in the Bible, particularly the dimensions and the descriptions for building the tabernacle given to Moses, the details of which are incredible. His contention is that the tabernacle was built to convey the geometry that was conveyed in the Great Pyramid in Egypt.
Wow.
Oh.
And,
that's awesome.
After read, at first blush, you think, oh, this guy's crazy. But when you read it and read why he thinks that, you start shaking your head going, well, that is actually possible. So it's a very, very interesting premise. And it's interesting to see, if you actually read the biblical accounts, the details of the proportions and sizes of the things that they have to make, including the coverings that go over the tabernacle. But then when they get to like the base that holds the wooden panels that go up inside the tabernacle, they just say to build the base. They don't give any description of that at all, because it doesn't really have an effect in the overall geometry of the tabernacle itself. It's just a base to hold the panels up. So it's a very fascinating read. It's not something you want to take lightly. It takes a good deal of study and I had to go back and reread sections of that 4 and 5 times before it sunk through my thick skull.
Wow. Robert, did we find you yet?
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good.
So, Don, I've been just listening, and it's blowing my mind. Really cool stuff. You mentioned so much, and the one question I did have was, while doing a little bit of research about the operatives, it looks like it's fairly typical in the length of time it takes to progress. But they said that here in the United States, that's just due to is it just because of the limited assemblages that it takes so much longer? And
No.
reading through it does say that it represents a lifetime of work or 40 years or so.
Yeah, it's no different in any other jurisdiction than in the United States. It's certainly we do have ours spread out a little bit more, but right now the United States province of the United States is the largest province in the operatives, and that's
Wow.
only in a very few number of years. I blank on the year that I actually joined, but it hadn't been that long. So it's not been in this country for more than about 10 years. Well, actually, it probably has been more than 10 years. There was a group of guys up in Allentown, PA, that traveled to Quebec, or no, I'm sorry, to not Quebec. It's the province that has the seat of government for Canada. Help me out, guys. Bail me out. Well, it is in Ontario, but it's the, I'm trying to think of the city.
Ottawa?
Ottawa. Ottawa had the only operatives assemblage in the Western Hemisphere. And these guys from Allentown, bless their hearts, I told you you had to be 75% attendance. They would go up to Ottawa for the meetings, and you might go up to a meeting that you couldn't even. You could go for the business meeting, but then they would shoo you out when they do a degree that you hadn't had yet. So it took them years and years to progress to the point where they could actually start an operative assemblage there in Allentown. Once that was established, that was the one I had joined initially. I'm still a member there. And then we had to organize an assemblage here in Virginia, which, let me tell you, that was a lot of hard work. It was not easy to do. And when you form your assemblage, you have to build all of the paraphernalia, which is no small piece of work. I mean, it was a lot of stuff, including stones that have to be cut. Each of the degrees, you have a stone involved that's special to that degree. Have you ever heard of a dressed rough ashlar?
No.
Yeah. That is what the apprentice is trained to carve, and that basically is putting the square corners on an oversized rough ashlar. And you make the corners first and make them all square and perfect, and then you can take off the stuff in the middle and have a perfect ashlar. But that is what the apprentice does, is he prepares the corners and breaks off the, well, remember in our degree, the common gavel to break off the rough corners of rough stones to prepare them for the building. And that's basically what is done with the indentured apprentice degree, and they have to be able to present at the end of their apprenticeship, they have to be able to present a dressed rough ashlar to show that they are worthy of progressing. So.
Wow, well done. You know, I wish we could go on for like 3 more hours talking about this, because it's utterly fascinating. But unfortunately, it is that time to start wrapping things up. So let me hand it back to the hosts for final thoughts and shameless plugs, starting with our man behind the curtain, Robert Johnson.
Hey, I appreciate it. I know the technical difficulties were goofy. I do appreciate all of the insight on the operatives. Something that before 3 to 4 months ago, I had no idea even existed. So cool. The tradition, it really made a lot of sense to me tonight when I hear guys who love Royal Arch. They're always pushing this story that Masonry was 7 degrees, and then it went down to 2, and then it was 3. And it was the Royal Arch who was there from the beginning, and they always talk about, and whether that's true or not, this makes a whole lot of sense when you talk about the way operative Masonry is the 7 degrees and how it was lessened to the 2, and then later on the 3rd degree was added. And for me, it answers a lot of questions, and just fascinating. And
well, Robert, if you stop to think about it, the York Rite of Masonry, the first 3 degrees of York Rite, the Blue Lodge, plus the 4 degrees of Royal Arch Masonry make a system of 7 degrees.
Exactly. So this is why it's so cool to me, and it just really it fills in those gaps. So well, branding for one, bridging the gap. Really cool stuff. And thanks so much for coming on. If you guys like Masonic podcasts, check out my show. It comes out 9:30 on Sunday nights. And Don, just amazing. Thanks, man.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay. Let's hand it off to Nick Johnson.
You know what I'm going to do? Instead of having a final thought, I'm going to have a final question. So, Don, I have a question for you. We just had a Athelstan court show up in Minnesota, and I'm just wondering now, with the operatives, is it kind of a slow process to move these assemblages slowly through the country? Is it kind of organic, or is there an actual push to maybe expand it further?
The problem with expansion is that you have to have so many 6th degree masons, so many 5th degree masons, and then the lower grades to be able to establish an assemblage, which means you have to invest not only the money but the time of traveling to another assemblage and getting the 3/4 75% attendance rate that you have to advance, and it takes years. So the operatives don't make it easy to expand. Believe me, it's a tough thing to do, and you really have to be committed to it. We got one member of our assemblage here in Virginia who travels from California.
Wow.
Regularly. Wow. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So Nick, come to Virginia quarterly, and John or I can put you up, and you'll be good.
We know a guy.
You know I have a problem. I'm on some steps, so holy smokes.
Are there 12 of them?
Or 3, 5, and 7.
3, 5, and 7 equals 15. There we go.
15-step program.
MillennialFreemason.com. Check it out. I might have some content showing up one of these days.
Thank you, Nick. Juan Sepulveda.
I enjoyed the fact that they're making stuff. They're actually having people do something with their hands that is going to stay with you. Right? They don't get to take that, right? That remains a part of the assemblage, right?
Right.
That's something that now goes from hand to hand, and it stays in there. I think that's really neat.
Well, Juan, let me tell you, the Bull Run assemblage actually has some stone that we got that was left over from building the Smithsonian Castle in Washington, D.C.
Oh,
nice.
It's red Seneca limestone taken from the Bull Run seam, and so because that was very much connected with the name that we chose, that's very special. It's really
That's
neat.
amazing. That's really cool. I'm here listening, and I'm thinking about, I'm kind of like going on a trip on my mind, imagining it all. That's excellent. I really appreciate the time you've taken to share this with us. Just like Robert mentioned, this is something that, a few months ago I had no clue I had no idea it existed. That's part of why we do this. There's so much about Masonry that is still veiled to us, and we get a chance to experience it a little bit at a time with brothers like you who can share those experiences. So we're grateful for it. And you, my friend, are the first repeat guest of the show, and for great reason. We really appreciate it.
And as Jason pointed out, it's the 69th episode. That's a very big honor.
69.
We can't get the co-masonry episode going until July.
No,
You had to go for that, didn't you, Jason?
I'm sorry.
Robert had some editing to do. All right. If you enjoy Masonic podcast, don't forget to check out Whence Came You. And while you're at it, download a few episodes of The Winding Stairs. And I have another episode coming up. I have something going on right now, so I can't promise you it's going to be this week. Very likely it's going to be next Monday, up and running. So thewindingstairs.com and freemasonryart.com, where you can get all that beautiful stuff that's behind the brothers right there on the other screen. So thank you,
There you go.
brothers.
Thank you, Jason Richards.
So just want to say real quick, thanks so much, Don, for coming back onto the show and blowing our minds. Thanks to everybody who's watching the show and continuing to give us feedback on topics you want to hear about. So we had a lot of people who are interested in this one. And I am actually going to cede the rest of my time to Don, because Don promised that he would blow my mind about Reverend James Anderson. And so I am willing to just shut up right now and say goodnight so that Don can go ahead.
Wow.
There's actually a book was written here in the U.S. Mr. Mertz, who published this book on the history of the operatives. And in his history, he claims that James Anderson, a Presbyterian minister from Scotland, moved down to London and joined the St. Paul's Lodge. That's the lodge that actually built St. Paul's Cathedral. And in the operatives, we have two officers that we don't have in speculatives. One is Deputy J and Deputy B, so you guys can figure that one out. The Deputy J is the hired chaplain. Deputy B is the hired surgeon, for obvious reasons, especially in the first degree when you have to determine that the man is fit. So they each had jobs they had to do, but they actually didn't take the degrees in Masonry. They took a special oath of secrecy. So they weren't true Masons in that respect. They took the oath of secrecy so they could do their jobs in the degrees. James Anderson was a speculative Mason, basically, and with all of the speculative Masons in the different lodges there in London, they met and talked and were planning, and they were trying to think ways that they could make Masonry more philosophical in nature. And the story goes, this is by Mertz, there's absolutely no confirmation of this, but Mertz claims that the first Grand Master Mason and the second Grand Master Mason discovered that James Anderson was making Masons and charging a price for that without any authority to do so. And this was obviously in the speculative system. And consequently, he was expelled by the first Grand Master Mason, who was none other than Sir Christopher Wren. So before the Grand Lodge of England was formed in 1717, the idea of Mertz was that he was expelled from Masonry. So that being the case, by our own definition, are we all clandestine?
Wow.
I'll leave you with that question.
Well, for those of you who didn't make the connection, this Reverend James Anderson wrote Anderson's Constitutions.
Actually, it was his son who wrote Anderson.
Really?
James Anderson by the same name, yeah, who actually wrote the Constitutions later on. But James Anderson was certainly very instrumental in the formation of the Grand Lodge. It was one of the founders and is supposedly our grand historian. So, you know, the victors write the history, and
Wow.
So let me get this straight.
he may have left a little out.
So basically, a guy who saw the degrees, started selling the degrees, and then they disciplined him. That sounds an awful lot like what maybe happened with the Northern jurisdiction in New York.
Well, this is all according to Mertz, and Mertz has no proof of it. And unfortunately, the minutes of St. Paul's Lodge, the Grand Lodge of England, claims do not exist. Whether they actually have them and don't want to show them, or whether they don't exist, is a good question. But in any case, there is no written proof that what Mertz claims is true. So
Thank you, Don, for that.
Interesting thought, yeah.
Well, you're just full of anecdotes, I tell you what. All right. Again, thank you very much, Don, for joining us. You are quickly becoming a fan favorite, as well as, of course, near and dear to our heart here in Virginia. The last thing I wanted to add is, you like podcasts? Of course you do. Keep this one going by supporting us and supporting the Alzheimer's Association by purchasing one of Don McAndrews pins. We have that on our website at www.theMasonicRoundtable.com/shop, or just go to theMasonicRoundtable.com and there's a shop link at the top. And
You don't get
I
the skull.
promise.
You just get the pin.
Yeah.
yes, skull not included.
Yes, right.
And I promise that I'll get better about sending them out on time.
But they do come out, and they are beautiful. So definitely support most excellent Don McAndrews as well in his endeavor for the Alzheimer's Association. Half of it goes to Alzheimer's, and half of it comes to support this lodge and keep us up and running. So that's all I got. It's been a wonderful night. Thank you, Don. Thank you, everyone. And thanks for watching. And keep searching for more light. Have a good night.